Greetings, everyone. My name is Lee Shokvist. I'm the Marketing Director at Campbell & Company. Welcome to today's webinar, Communicating Your Campaign Case. Today's Wednesday, July 13th, and we're broadcasting live from Chicago. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to go over just a few simple logistics. Please close any programs that you might have running on your computer, of course, except GoToWebinar. Call in for the audio portion today using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. If you have a cell phone close to you, we recommend moving that away from your computer. And if you do still experience any sort of visual issues, feel free to send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToMeeting at 800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last about an hour, and for your participation, you'll earn 1 continuing education credit with CFRE International, and later today you'll also receive an email from GoToWebinar, which will include information on how to download your certificate, as well as a PDF of today's presentation. The webinar is also being recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording, and as always, we want to remind you that we welcome your questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to type your questions into that question box on the right hand side in the pane there, and that's in the control panel. And if we can work your question in during the course of today's conversation, we'll do so, but we may also hold time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A as well. So let's get things moving along here. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Andy Brommel, who's the Director of our Communications Consulting Group, and Pat Chestnut, the Consultant in the Communications Group as well. Let's get started.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is Andy Brommel, and Pat Chestnut is with me. You'll be hearing from both of us today. You won't be seeing us. If those of you who've been on some of our other webinars over the past year know that sometimes we do show our webcam and have a video component. Didn't feel like couldn't get it organized today, so. Let us know. It's something we've been experimenting with. Let us know in the comments if that's a helpful feature, if it aids in your comprehension to have a goofy-looking bald guy accompanying the slides at every step of the way. We can always do that in the future. So, as you see on the slide here, this is a full year of webinars draws to a close. Today is the final installment in our 2015-2016 cycle of fundraising communications webinars. I want to thank you all for joining us, especially those who have hung with us through multiple sessions, and also thank you to some of our colleagues. I mentioned our communications team here at Campbell & Company, our group that really focuses on campaign casework. A lot of the ideas that we're sharing here come from that team and from the work that we do. I also want to give a shout out to our fundraising colleagues in the firm. These are the kind of the core of Campbell & Company's work, and these are the people who've really taught us everything that we know about campaigns. So, you know, Pat and I come to this as communicators. We've learned fundraising and campaigns through working with our colleagues. I want to recognize them. And just a quick note, we'll be coming out pretty soon with the schedule for next year's webinars. It's kind of on a school year, so it starts in the fall. We've got a full slate of those planned for the fundraising communications series, as well as a number of other interesting sessions in all kinds of other fundraising related areas. But yeah, we'll be building on the communications webinars that we've done this year. We may be trying some new stuff. We may have some surprises in there for you. I don't know exactly what those are. I haven't planned them yet, so I guess it'll be a surprise to me too. But you know, we always do try to come up with something new and do something different every year. So with that said, I'm just going to jump right in and get us started. And with campaign communications and the campaign case for support, this is our focus today. And our usual model here, when we're talking about sort of how you build this model of campaign success, we typically talk about this as being supported by a few different pillars. The case for support, your donor engagement, including your donor capacity, your volunteer leadership in the campaign, as well as your staffing and systems, kind of your internal machinery of fundraising. And you know, this is a pretty typical graphic, kind of an architectural metaphor. You may have seen something like this. Frankly, if you've hired a consultant before and you don't get 45 clip art graphics like this, you aren't really getting your money's worth. But you know, this is pretty traditional. It's good so far as it goes. But one thing that I think it obscures is that the case is really sort of not like the other pieces in this equation. All these things are critical, but the case is really about ideas and messages, and the other three pillars are really mostly about people. So they're kind of different. The other thing that kind of bugs me about this model is it kind of looks like they're all equal and they're all holding up the weights, and if you took one or two of them out, you'd really be okay as long as the others were strong, or if you were like really good at Jenga. You know, it's when really I think you need all four of these things to work together in a very particular way. So here's another view. Big time fundraising, significant campaigns. At some point, it's kind of a big machine. You know, you have all these different factors. You have your staffing and systems. That's part of the machine. That's sort of helping drive the volunteer part of the machine, which is really critical. All of that's kind of driving what's happening on the donor side. And, you know, it's sophisticated. It's complicated. If you're the VP or the director of development, all these things work together, and these are all different things that you're thinking about. I like to think of the case as really the kind of the power, the electricity that powers the whole machine. It's what energizes your staff and gives them the confidence that they've got something they can go out there and sell. You know, it's really what compels your volunteers to get involved. They have to believe in the case. Life is short. There's so many other things that they could be doing with their time. And with your donors, of course, it's what drives them to give at greater levels, and in a campaign you're usually looking for them to make their largest gifts ever. So the case is what really powers all of that. And the other thing that I think comes out of this view of the matter is the case can also be that thing that can be a little bit easy to overlook. And if the whole machine isn't working, sometimes you may not notice that it's actually because it's unplugged. If you're the vice president and you're trying to take care of all these things in a campaign, it's easy to forget, you know, that the case is the one thing in this equation that won't come and complain to you if it's not happy or if it's not getting enough attention. So it can be, there are a lot of things that can crop up in campaigns that can be challenges that might in some way stem from having your case a little bit underpowered. So, all right, enough with the metaphors. Basically, no case, no campaign. We'll keep it as simple as that.
Now, so that's kind of why we think a case is so important to a campaign. But before we get into kind of how we approach case development, we want to take just a minute to think about what makes campaign case development different in particular. Because really, it is a different kind of case than your overall case or the case you might make in the course of an annual fund. And we think that there are a lot of advantages that come with that, as well as challenges that are really unique to the campaign context. So first, when it comes to campaigns, the vision is simply bigger. We're talking about special, large-scale, multi-year initiatives. And so that means that you have the opportunity to make a case for something that's ambitious, even visionary, but that's still within the realm of possibility. And that's an opportunity that we don't think you should pass up. Campaign cases really give you a chance to be bold and think big. And as you'll see soon, we really encourage you to do that when you begin your campaign case development. Now, campaigns also come with a built-in sense of urgency. They create a sense of the moment that makes that why now question, which we know we're always hearing from donors, especially during campaigns, that much more pointed, and the answer to the question that much more clear. And because we're talking about special one-time projects, we're talking about projects that are often especially compelling and easier to rally people around and raise funds for. But at the same time, your case really has to do heavy lifting during a campaign, because it needs to inspire people who already care about you, or already bought in general, and already giving, to go above and beyond what they might otherwise do, even beyond where they might think they're comfortable giving. These are also efforts that really require significant volunteer leadership, and much more so than annual fundraising in our experience. And so you need to find ways to not only shape a strong case that your staff's going to take out, but to get your volunteers to embrace your campaign case and to understand enough that they feel comfortable carrying your message out there for you. And of course, when you have that larger volunteer structure, well, it means everything in a campaign happens by committee. We all know that. And I don't want you to get the wrong impression here. There are real benefits to having this collaborative, committee-oriented approach, but it also means that it can be a particular challenge to create a strong and clear and compelling case without falling into that whole watered-down approach that inevitably seems to come out of any writing you do by committee. And we all know what writing by committee looks like. It's terrible. Just don't do it. But you do still have to find ways to meaningfully engage and involve your volunteer committees. And that balance there between engaging people, involving your committee, but not writing by committee, it can be a tricky one to strike. Now, one of the most fun parts of our work, if you do want to call it that, is that whenever our firm conducts campaign planning studies, we get direct feedback on the case preview documents from donors and volunteers. And so before we move on, we just want to share what we hear most often, because it's really worth keeping in mind as you develop your campaign case. And because just as a result of the work we do, we get really unique insights into why campaign cases fail, which is, it can be tough when you're the one who wrote it, but it's always useful to hear. So a lot of times we'll hear people say, hey, yeah, these seem like good projects, but what's the vision? What's it really about? And then, of course, on the other side, we'll sometimes have people say, yeah, that sounds like a good vision. It's really inspiring, but before I commit to this, I really need to see the details. I need to understand these projects better. And really, that just hints to us that something we'll talk about soon, that you need to make sure your campaign case is equally strong at both levels, at the project level and at the big picture visionary level. Oftentimes we'll hear people say, hey, it sounds great, but I don't quite get what's really going to be different. I think I'm just going to stick with my current giving. And usually that what's different question is one of the most difficult ones to clarify. And if you don't do it, it's going to become a major barrier to your fundraising success in a campaign. And then, of course, there's the piece of feedback that every writer loves to hear, which is, I didn't read it. And it's something that, it's never fun, but it does speak to something important and worth keeping in mind, which is that we are trying to get through to busy people who just have exceptional demands placed on them in their time pretty much all the time. And we need to find ways to get complex ideas across in interesting, easy to read, and striking ways. And so these are just some of the kind of common pieces of feedback we hear and the kind of challenges that really guide our thinking as we approach case development. But before we get into what we do, I just want to reiterate what Andy talked about earlier when he was showing you that machine metaphor. And that's that a strong case is quite simply among the most important priorities when you're preparing for your campaign. And we really cannot emphasize enough that we feel it's worth making sure you devote the time, energy, and resources to it. Because if you don't have a campaign case that works, you're going to have trouble moving your campaign forward and getting your organization where you want to be.
So let's dig in and start talking through our an approach to thinking about the campaign case. Now there are a lot of ways to talk about this, a lot of different kind of approaches. Some more narrative, some more logical, more story-driven. There's all kinds of different ways. There's not just one way to develop a good campaign case, but we like to use this structure of 3 levels because it helps us just, it keeps things simple, keeps things organized, and it challenges us to keep clarifying our thinking rather than expanding our thinking. So we tend to think of most campaigns having 3 different levels. At the project level down at the bottom, that's pretty straightforward. A campaign usually begins as a number of projects that you want to fund. Sometimes it's a lot of projects. Above that, in the org chart, is the strategy level. You often will have if you have too many projects, you'll group them into buckets and sort of group them into major strategies. And then the big picture level, which is what actually we're going to spend the most time talking about. Big picture is really kind of what does it all add up to? What's the overall impact? What's the 1 or 2 things you want to remember about this campaign? And so we have these, and each of these 3 levels has a different kind of writing, a different kind of thinking, different kinds of questions that come along with it. But fundamentally, a great campaign case should be strong and should work at every level. And the reason we say that is not just because the reason we want you to be strong at every level is not just because you can or because good things are better than bad things or something. It's because different donors engage at different levels. You will have some donors who are all about the big picture, and you can get them excited around a vision. They'll just take that and run with it, and they'll trust you to have the rest of the details figured out. but there are donors for whom you need to have the big picture working really well. Then there are those donors who are much more project focused. They'll find the project that they love and they'll kind of adopt it. They'll have a pet project. Those donors are out there too. We love them all. We got to be ready for all of them, and that means we need a case that can speak compellingly at the different levels. One more thing about these levels, it makes it easier to talk through the case. If you can think through the case from top to bottom, you can talk through the case from top to bottom. So there's kind of a conversational logic to them where you're saying, this campaign is really all about X, Y, Z at the big picture level. And in order to achieve that, we have to focus on, 2 or 3 specific strategies. And so we've identified a number of key projects within those strategies that have the greatest impact and benefit. Once you've got that figured out, it's like it becomes easy to talk through it. Here's a real simple example of that. We were working with a school, tremendous, kind of an inner city school, doing really amazing things. It's been around for about 25 years, and they're providing a really outstanding education in a neighborhood that really needs it, where the neighborhood schools are in really bad shape. The problem with this school is that it's full. They've been full for years. There's all these families on the waiting list, and it's just heartbreaking for them when their kids can't get in strictly because of capacity. So this campaign is all about, at the big picture level, it's about being able to serve more students. We need to grow. We need to take what we're doing and do more of it because the need is there. In order to be ready to serve more students, that takes a lot. We have to do it on the facilities side, where there's a couple projects there. We need to grow our faculty to serve more students. That means adding new positions and investing in their professional development. And of course, it means making sure we have the support for the students themselves, because almost all of them, 99% of them, depend on scholarships. So, super simple example. You've got one clear goal at the top, 3 things at the strategic level that need to happen in order to make that possible, and then some specific projects that are at the kind of the concrete level.
So that's kind of the overall structure, kind of what it looks like when you get there at the end of a case that's strong at every level. And we want to spend a little bit of time thinking about the keys to making a strong case at each of those levels individually, so that you can really make sure you have something that truly works for you and for all of your donors. And so first, with the big picture, what we want to think about, what makes this so important, is that this is where you have a chance to make your campaign feel big, to elevate what you're raising money for, and really convey a lot of excitement and urgency and vision. And if you succeed here, this is how you help people see what's different and why they need to go above and beyond in their giving. The big picture is also your chance to express that one vivid idea you want people to walk away with. And if you do that well, it'll help the campaign feel clear and understandable. So people, whether they're donors or volunteers or staff, feel like they can wrap their arms around it. It's small enough to manage because it's got that one idea, but it's big enough to be exciting and motivating. And of course, if you nail down the big idea, as you may have gotten a sense from as Andy read through those examples, you're going to have essentially an elevator speech pre-written that'll make it really easy for your staff and volunteers to go out into your community and tell a consistent but still really compelling story. And so we wanted to show you an example of how a big picture can really put a cap on a campaign and take it to another level as you express your case. This is an example drawn from an experience we had with the College of Art and Design. And if you look at what the campaign was funding at those lower 2 levels, it's pretty standard, straightforward, right? We're investing in students through scholarships, things like travel grants, and we're investing in our faculty, whether that means professional development or compensation or endowed shares, right? They're important, but they're also the kind of things we're raising money for and doing on an ongoing basis. And so if all you had was that, you're inevitably going to get the question, so what's different? Okay, I get why this is important, but why is this campaign so important right now? Why do I make my biggest gift I've ever made to you at this moment in time? And that's where the big picture comes in. We really got together with staff and volunteers and started talking with them about why these increased investments in students and faculty were so important and what we wanted to achieve through them by making this focused one-time infusion of funds now. And what we came away with was that it's all about attracting the most creative people in the world to come here and make their careers in our city. And once we got that, it really elevated what the campaign was all about. It provided us with kind of a simple idea that was compelling enough to draw people in and organize all these priorities we eventually wanted to direct their investments towards. And it made it easy to share this campaign and its priorities with a lot of people throughout the community. Because yes, your alumni may care about scholarships for students, but that civic leader in your town, he or she may want to hear about a different aspect of what it really means. And so it broadened the campaign at the same time as it elevated it.
I love that example because it's, you know, you could switch in different projects as the campaign evolves. Projects may come and go. You may finish some and start others. But that big picture, that vision should be consistent and compelling. So that's the big picture level, and we're going to spend a bunch more time talking about that level a little bit later because we think it's the most important for this topic. But let's keep going down our little construct here. What's going on at the strategy level? This is kind of the middle level, the middle child in the order. What's happening here is you're introducing ideas that help make your campaign feel focused, that convey that you're building on, it conveys the kind of smart planning that you've done. A lot of times this level is coming from the major structure of your strategic plan, for instance. And it can be a way of helping donors kind of find their part that they want to attach to. So let's just take an example. This is from a large national voluntary health association, a disease society. So their big picture, as you might expect, is to achieve a world without this particular disease. Down at the project level, they've got just tons and tons of stuff going on, really sophisticated, esoteric research things, research projects that only the scientists could really understand, a number of different care and support functions. They're doing advocacy, they're building awareness, they're doing, you know, 5Ks and walks. There's so much going on at the project level that you kind of don't want to, it's almost too much, and you can't really capture it all. So you need that strategy level to organize it and say, you know, look, there are 20 things we're doing in any given year, but basically we're advancing that vision through 4 major strategies: research, supporting families, advocacy in Washington and in state capitals, and then building awareness through marketing and outreach and fundraising. So it makes the whole thing manageable. And then if you're a donor, I think it helps you find your way. Are you a research donor? Does the science really excite you? Are you more of a care and support for families kind of donor? Like, does that just from your family experience, does that speak to you emotionally? You want to give in that category? You know, it helps a donor find their way to the project that's going to mean the most to them. The other thing it does is, you know, a lot of times you have a kind of too many projects in a campaign. This is an example from a school that we were working with. And this wasn't even a very large campaign by the goal, but they just had it was kind of a advancing on all fronts kind of campaign, all these different projects. And it became, you're at some risk of donors saying, well, this is just a laundry list, this is your wish list, this, you know, this is just everything you want. To make this feel like it's more strategic and intentional and, you know, decisive, build it into a very simple strategy kind of structure here, where we're taking all those things. They actually don't all even fit on the slide, so I dropped a few of them. But basically, it means investing in the teachers and programs, a few investments in the campus, and then some direct investments that benefit students and families. So now that campaign feels manageable, and you can think about how those, you know, you can keep all that in your mind at once.
Now, one point we do want to make just before we move on, you know, the strategy level, it is exceptionally important, especially if you have a lot of projects. And I know Andy spoke well to its benefits, but this is the one level that you don't always have to have there. And you can think of situations where it might not be necessary, like this one we have on the screen, right? Say you're a small theater that's been growing, you've been in rented spaces, kind of going to different theaters around town, borrowing their stages, and now you're launching your first campaign to build your permanent home. That's the big idea. There might not be a lot of different strategies around it. It's about who you are as an organization and building that permanent home through the new theater itself and through endowment. You don't always need to have a strategy level, though it's often useful. Now, we want to talk for just a minute about projects then. And projects are really important. As I'll talk about in just a second, they help make your campaign concrete and answer a lot of the questions and concerns. And these are oftentimes the cases that could stand alone. You might go out to a donor and just want to talk to them about that one project. But though they often can stand on their own, that doesn't always mean that you want to separate them fully from the big picture. So first, just a few points to think about as you get into making cases for your projects during a campaign. And the first thing is that they make the campaign real, right? This is how you make it seem like your campaign's not hypothetical, not just rhetoric. They take that vision and big picture you have and bring it down to earth with concrete, tangible things that donors can support. And just even rhetorically, even narratively, when you write about the project, they're helping your donors picture what things are like afterwards and what the big picture really means. I can just tell you from my experiences, I'm personally more of the big picture guy. That's what I'm most drawn towards and excited about. But it's really the big picture totally clicks in my mind only after I've read about the details. And I might kind of forget about the details afterwards, but I need to read them and hear about them so that the big picture can make sense and that abstraction can have meaning in my mind. Now, project cases are often where donors are going to ask the most challenging questions. And so you're going to want to make sure you're prepared to answer those. This is where they'll want to know the details, all the plans. They might want to know the timeline and the budget of a new building, how it's going to affect other activities at your school, your theater, whatever your organization is. And so really, they're going to probably do their due diligence before making this once-in-a-lifetime investment in a particular project. And so you're going to want to be ready to make sure you have those details and those answers for them so that they can help give them confidence to make that investment in your project. That being said, we do think it's important to keep in mind that projects don't have to hold you up. You can launch your campaign while you're still defining all the details about them, and really focus on the big picture and goals, and just let people know the details are still taking shape. We'll show you in just a minute an example of how you can share enough about the project without knowing everything, but it's still, this is something that's especially true though in general. When you're talking with donors and volunteers who are closest to you, they're going to have a lot of trust in you. They're going to be interested really in what's the vision, where are we going next. This is especially true of your board members. And so you can let them know that, start to engage them in the campaign through the big picture, and then let them know you'll talk about projects in due time as those plans are finalized. Finally, while the projects can stand on their own, you can make a case about them, we do think it's still important to make sure you tie them back to that big picture once you have it defined. Because first, it's going to just provide the context for each project that makes it feel important and exciting. So that, it's not just that we're raising this new funds for this new scholarship, it's we're raising funds for new scholarships that will help us attract the most talented and creative people in the world to our city. It just gives a little bit of extra oomph to each project. And it also helps make sure that you keep a cohesive feel to the campaign, which is really important as donors begin to sort themselves by different strategies and projects so they all feel like they're working towards the same goal. And finally, just something that we've learned in our experience, volunteers are often really anxious about knowing the details. And it's important to recognize that because the anxiety can oftentimes interfere with their willingness to go out there and meet with donors or prospects. They'll say, yeah, I want to help out with the solicitation call, but I'm not sure I really understand things enough. I don't think I quite know it all yet, and I don't want to get caught looking like an idiot. But really, if you ask us, they don't actually need to know the details. What they're really saying is, I just want to know they're there. So if you equip them with appropriate resources that they can refer to, then that'll usually give them the confidence to go out and have the broader conversation with the donor, knowing they can then pass them on to the appropriate resource when the questions about those details come up. Now, just a simple tip we like to use is if you're going to write a project case, try starting by just listing, say, 5 clear, simple benefits or features. This really helps make your project case easy to remember because there are only 5 things you need to know about it. It'll give your volunteers that confidence because they can remember 5 simple things to say, and it really works well while those details are evolving. So you can take a look at this example of drawn from a theater again. It talks about 5 benefits of that new theater, right? It'll keep this great theater here for decades, double our educational programs, have all these real tangible impacts that are specific enough you can picture them, but that we can talk about without having to show you architectural renderings or talk about the square footage of our new theater. It really helps you get to that detailed, specific level without needing to know just about everything and without stopping you from moving forward with your campaign during the planning process.
Yeah, that's a great point. This example was from a theater that they were still doing their search for the new site for their theater. They didn't know where exactly it was going to be, but we knew that wherever it was going to be, it was definitely going to be able to do these things, and that was enough to at least get that first round of conversations going and get those conversations started with donors. So the point when looking at these 3 levels is not just that you have to have something in each of them, but that each of them can be stronger or weaker. At the big picture level, when you get that right, it just feels like this monumental idea that attracts supporters. It's sort of charismatic in a way. If you're not careful with it, it can be an overblown kind of platitude or just rhetoric. But at the strategy level, it can feel ingenious, like, oh, they've got such mastery of this mission. They know exactly where the levers are that they need to push to achieve that idea. Or it can just feel like a boring transcription of your strategic plan. At the project level, when you get project cases right, they feel like these amazing opportunities. It's like retail, like just like a product that's packaged and just totally appealing in its specificity. If you don't get those right, it can feel, we call that, here's some stuff. Here's some stuff we want to do. Here's some stuff that we need some money for. Campaigns that are lacking on the big picture and just feel like a laundry list, or the projects aren't compelling, we'll jokingly refer to those as it's kind of a here's some stuff campaign. But if you roll all those together, you can be strong or weak at every level, and if that means that your sort of best case or worst case, you could have monumental strategic opportunities or overblown, boring stuff. And I think we all have maybe felt and seen campaigns that hit both sides of this spectrum. It's just kind of how it is. All right, so let's take some more time at going into the big picture. We really want to focus here, and the reason for that is that we feel like most organizations struggle to articulate the big picture in their campaigns. When we work with organizations, this seems to be the piece that people get the most hung up on, and this is the level that often needs the most additional love. I'm not sure exactly. Pat, why do you think that is, just to put you on the spot?
I think because it's probably first that it's more difficult, right? Thinking in bigger abstract terms that are going to, through one sentence, clarify what 10 different projects truly mean really takes a lot of work, a lot of cognitive labor. And I think the second thing is just oftentimes our planning processes are devoted to strategies and projects. So those you can draw out pretty directly from the strategic plan, maybe try to clarify them, talk about what's so compelling or important about them. But that big picture vision is not always there in the most developed or refined way. So it takes a little bit of extra work, and it's easy just to get too busy to be like, I don't have time to do this. Let's just go raise money for these 3 projects we know people love.
Beautifully said. I genuinely put him on the spot there, but then he sounded scripted. So there's the Pat Chestnut experience for you. I think we're not used to thinking at this level. I mean, there's not a part of your average workday where it's like, let me just step back and think visionary, huge. Usually it's like, how many fires do I have to put out before I can go home? All right, that's a little cynical. Anyway, so we want to talk through a few different approaches to the vision or to the big picture level. Here I go. Because it can actually look pretty different. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. The most obvious is that it can be super visionary. You can really approach this in terms of just thinking about vision. You may have a vision coming out of your strategic plan that already kind of gets you half of the way there. That'd be great. But we really want to think about what the visionary approach can be. So here's one good example. This campaign, the big picture for this campaign is we're ready to create a new model for public media that fits our moment. That's the vision. Everything in this campaign is building up toward that vision. The idea is, the media landscape has changed, and our community has very different needs from public media now than it did 10, 20 years ago. The moment has changed, and we need to step up and create a model for public media that actually fits what our community needs. That means it's digital first. That means it's across different channels and different platforms. It means that it's very locally focused to fill the gap left by the newspapers, not investing in local journalism as much. It means that it's elevating lots of different voices, not just one voice in our community. So that's what our moment calls for. We're going to create the model that fits that, and when we do it, it's going to be an example for cities everywhere. So that's just a one simple kind of like extemporaneous version of kind of a vision that can drive a campaign.
Now, But it is still important to recognize that visionary doesn't have to mean building something new, whether it's a new model or a new building. It can also be something that's very mission-oriented and people-focused. So this right here is drawn from a human service organization we had worked with. And really the vision here, the big picture of this campaign, is giving every child every chance at a great future. It's a relatively small human service organization, or it's a human service organization in a relatively small community, excuse me. That really has this extraordinary commitment that, they really just feel like every kid is their kid. They don't turn kids away. They don't look at kids and say, oh, you come from a difficult background. You've been involved with a gang. We can't help you. They give every kid a chance to come in, and they believe they can work through their extraordinary programs to give them a leg up and put them on a path to success and to self-determination. And so really what this campaign was doing, what this effort was doing, was reflecting that commitment to each individual, expanding it to more children, and ultimately hinting at the ambition to let it stretch across the entire community, that these kids, they're all part of our community, and we want to give every single one every chance at a great future, and your gift takes us to the next level, lets us expand our reach and our work and our programs so we can do that.
That's great. So that's what you see at this visionary level, is that a campaign, the big picture can be fairly driven by ideas. Pat's example is it's idealistic, it's moralistic. So a vision can have that feeling where it's very much driven by big ideas. That said, you can also be, here's another one. It's time to build the global home for children's health. That's a big idea. So beyond big ideas, you can also be fairly concrete. So I've got a couple examples here. Big picture in this campaign: to achieve a world without XYZ disease. So we showed this one to you earlier. It is visionary, but it's also very concrete. It's a little bit more measurable. Here's another one that we showed earlier: to extend the power of a sample school education to many more students. It's a vision, but it's very specific. It's very concrete. Here's another one. It's time to change our approach to social service. Pat, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this is just one that's, it's kind of a more goal-oriented version of that visionary build a new model one that Andy showed on the previous slide. But it's really talking about we're doing something very major right here. We're shifting how we serve the people in our community, but it's ultimately something that you can measure in very outcomes-based ways and that you can show what that new approach looks like in practice. It's a little more on the ground and concrete than simply creating a new model that will influence people everywhere.
So finally, sometimes the big picture is more of a common theme that flows through your different projects and initiatives, less so than a singular goal or vision. A good example of this is for a school that we worked with. This campaign is about all the learning that happens outside the classroom. So this is a school that's academically already great, and they've invested in academics and in their classrooms and core academic facilities in some of their most recent campaigns. Their new campaign is about their Performing Arts Center. It's about leadership programs. It's about athletics. And we were struggling a little bit with this to figure out what's the common thread with this campaign that feels like it's kind of pieced together from a lot of different areas. And we at some point we realized it's about all the ways that kids learn beyond the classroom, through playing a sport or being on stage or public speaking or being a member of a team. This campaign hits on all of those things, and so what felt like a little bit of a grab bag at first turned out to have a common theme that brought it all together.
Then we have this one here. We're turning the idea of a museum inside out. This is something drawn from a museum that really had this really cool vision. It's a natural history museum that does a lot of wonderful scientific and research work behind the scenes, that has these amazing, extensive collections behind the scenes, and that wanted to create a new kind of museum that would actually have a lot of kind of clear glass walls that would invite people in to see all that activity and all that wonderful things that so many people miss. And really what they ended up hitting on was that it's not necessarily we're doing something different. This is not a concrete goal per se and not a broad sweeping vision per se, but it is a theme that plants an image in your head of a museum turned inside out, accessible to everyone in a new way that people found really motivating and exciting.
One final example, This one's dead simple. We must ensure that our facilities match the quality of our programs. Everyone, this is, I'm not even going to bother explaining it. It's just very, very straightforward. So your big picture doesn't need to necessarily be a giant vision. It just needs to be some singular kind of idea that makes everything click.
And these thematic ones too are what they really work well at is they've given you something you can return to again and again. They kind of give you that refrain, especially as you talk about individual projects or strategies.
Exactly. So one thing you might be wondering at this point in the presentation is, why are we only showing you single sentences? Everything we've shown thus far, just one sentence statements, very simple little messages. That's very intentional. We know that any one of us and any one of you can go and write a lengthy case statement. We know that you can elaborate and embellish and circulate drafts and have every member of your staff tack on their version and their edits. And it's not hard to write a long version, but getting the short version right, the really simple version, once you've got the one sentence version, is very easy to build outward, to create an elevator speech, to build out into case statement, campaign collateral. That's like running downhill. Whereas when you start with a long version and you have to keep cutting it down, and your board members keep saying, "Oh, I need that. That's fine, but give me the nuts and bolts version. Give me the elevator speech." If you start with the long version and then try to cut it down, it's just sort of difficult and painful at every stage. So we really like to focus on getting those simple ideas in place.
Now, just a few quick thoughts about really what makes a campaign vision good or successful in our view. There are kind of three things we want to highlight. First, it's easy to remember. A really good campaign vision, a good articulation of the big picture, is charismatic or sticky. People will remember and think about it, which is important for them, especially if they're donors, but it's also important for them to be able to go out and explain it to others. If it sticks in their head, it will spread and people will keep talking about it. Second, again, it's something you can picture in your head because it's not simply abstract, but it's a vision that you can imagine and that then you'll hopefully want to make real. It's just something that you kind of get when you hear it and don't need a ton of additional explanation. I find this one's often the difference between that monumental vision versus the overblown platitude. It's overblown platitudes are things you can't picture in your head. I think this one is really key to making that work.
Yeah.
And finally, a good vision is oftentimes bold, even audacious, but still credible. It has to be able to inspire people without feeling so grandiose or hyperbolic that donors won't think you can actually achieve it. And because if they don't think you can achieve it, they're just not going to give to it. Also, this last one is oftentimes where we think the urgency can come in. That's that question of why now. A lot of times something bold might be a bold solution to a pressing or major challenge, and that can create a sense of urgency. But I also think just the boldness of an opportunity and the urgency and irrepressibility of a good idea is also something that can create a sense of why now. We have a chance to create something that doesn't yet exist, but that is so amazing and so needed, we should just act to do it. That usually works in my experience as well.
Yeah, urgency can come from excitement, not just from threat.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to make sure you get it right, we do just want to reiterate again, make sure you take the time. It's easy to skip over the big picture. People tend to do it a lot, but it's, in our view, one of the most important parts of your case. It's worth devoting time to. As you're going through your case, as you're beginning oftentimes with those projects that tend to start out more defined at the beginning of the process, just keep looking for themes. Think about what's resonating most about each project and what they might add up to together. Kind of when we hear about certain things like the impact on people in our city, or extending education to more people, that might start to hint at a big picture vision you can pull out. And finally, try it out loud. This is good especially when you're doing the one sentence version Andy was talking about, because really we think when you speak it out loud, it forces you to clarify, to be more precise, more active in your language. But also speaking it out loud gives you an opportunity to test it on others, and especially donors, volunteers, board members, so that you can get their reactions and keep refining it. Now, just a couple simple exercises we use to help get us towards the big picture. Sometimes we'll start with sentence starters like, this campaign is all about, we must, or it's time to X. That helps us focus on that one sentence version. And then we'll oftentimes use eye exam questions to help us kind of calibrate where our focus is and just think about it in an indirect way. So we might ask our clients, you know, is this big picture about an emotional case or a rational appeal? Is it about the truly big picture or something specific we're creating and achieving right now? Is it energetic and fun and exciting, or is it a weighty and serious topic we're trying to address? And like we were saying earlier, is it about a threat or an exciting aspiration for the future?
These are all both the sentence starters and the kind of the eye exam questions. These are things that we like to do these with board members all the time. Actually, that's one of our more common steps at the beginning of a case process is to kind of just get some board members in the room and do that kind of exercise. By the way, we call these eye exam questions because it's like when you go to the eye doctor and they ask you, which is better, A or B, A or B, B or C?
One quick point, too, about involving your board members there. Earlier when I was talking about the challenges of a campaign case, we talked about you want to engage your committees without writing by committee. Something like this kind of exercise or workshopping is a great opportunity to do that. Let them help shape the case without necessarily having 12 authors in the room at once.
Yeah, amen. All right, so let's talk a little bit about process, and we're going to keep this pretty short so that we have time for questions. One question that may come up for you is, how do I actually advance, what's the right way to do this kind of case development? Do I need to have a case statement? Do I need to be writing a traditional case narrative? We say use the vehicle that works for you. There's some document that you'll use to kind of get you through the case process and get your story straight, get these ideas sorted out. It can be a narrative, it can be an outline. I love an outline. It can be a PowerPoint. Those of you who've been in our previous webinars will know how much we love some of these different formats and have heard me throw shade at case statements probably a little bit more than is necessary. But the point is, use what works for you. And sometimes something a little simpler like an outline or a PowerPoint is a little bit easier because it invites less editing. All right, so use a task force. And I like to specify there are good task forces and there are challenging task forces. Try to keep it pretty tight. You, of course, need your exec or CEO or whatever that title is for you guys. Your advancement leadership, maybe a major gift officer or two. A select number of your campaign volunteers, if you have a committee or board members, maybe some additional senior leadership, but you want to keep a pretty tight group around defining the case. And within that same idea, you want to, in most cases, have one author designated for all the reasons that Pat's already touched on. Someone needs to own the process, and that needs to be pretty clearly understood. As you think about engaging your board, we strongly recommend that you engage them more as an audience and as kind of a sounding board rather than as a direct collaborator or author. So when you're going to your full board, that should be to present work that's pretty fully developed, and you're asking for further assistance in making it as strong as it can be, but not so much, let's have a board meeting devoted to we're all going to hammer out the case.
And now we're not going to spend too much time talking about communication strategy in the sense of a full communications plan, because really we want to emphasize that the first thing to go about doing is clarifying your case message itself, then strategizing about how to communicate it. But just the one point we do want to make here is thinking carefully about what you need when, because you don't need every single communications vehicle fully developed before you go out there during your campaign and start raising money. So those first gifts, right? When you think about maybe your 20 closest donors, board members, perhaps around their campaign steering committee, you really don't need finalized materials and maybe not even a campaign name or logo yet when you speak with them. You want to just work on clarifying your key messages or talking points, perhaps having one document, but really you're going to be presenting them with customized presentations and proposals. These are people who you're going to be having ongoing conversations with, and you might even be asking their input to help shape the case in big picture. And because they're so close to you, they probably have that level of trust that you can engage them early on as the final case is taking shape. Then second, we tend to think about the major gifts phase. And really once you get outside that very inner circle of donors, that's when you tend to want, and you're going to probably need more finalized, polished materials. You want a campaign name and identity so that you can differentiate this from your ongoing fundraising communications and really convey both the big idea of the campaign and why this is such a big moment. It makes it feel more special when you have a campaign identity. We recommend materials like a design case presentation deck, which you can use in person as a flip book or in small group meetings or dinners during the major gifts phase. Some print materials or maybe an iPad app, which might work as, well, the print materials will be a leave behind. The iPad app might be a different form of cultivation tool in person. And a video, which we actually find very helpful for conveying the big picture at a broader level. It can also be especially helpful if you have a really visionary case that donors or that your volunteers aren't necessarily comfortable expressing in their own words. We think the video can kind of free them of that burden so that they can share it with people and then talk about their personal connection to the campaign. And then finally, once you get to the public phase, that's when you're going to want to think about broad-based communications vehicles. Really, that's the first time you'll need a website, since so much of the major gift fundraising will take place in person, face-to-face. And that's when you can think about direct mail, video events, and really fully integrated into all of your organizational communications, whether it's a playbill or an annual report.
So this is obviously a very simple approach to the strategy, but it reflects the sense of what do you need for the first 20, what do you need for the next 200, and then what do you need for everyone else in the public phase. And this is pretty typical of how we end up approaching projects. So that's our content that we've got planned. We'd love to use the remaining 10 minutes or so, and we could stay on a little bit afterward to field some questions. And we look forward to hearing those.
Sure. Well, this is Lee again, the marketing director. A couple things have come in that are interesting, and one of them is fairly direct that has to do with the ideal length of a case statement and what that might be.
Mm-hmm. So let me think about that. To me, I struggle to answer the question because I don't find. I think the traditional practice is that you see case statements that are 10 or 15 pages long. To me, it has a lot more. What's much more important is, do you have clear ideas expressed in your case? And that's really been the focus of our whole approach to this webinar, is to show what are the areas where you need to have really clear thinking around the main ideas of your campaign. One of our previous webinars, which you can see, it's archived on our website. You might want to go check that out. It's the second one. It's called Fundraising Communications 2, Define or Crafting Your Message. And that's really all about how do you distill your overall case into very clear, very succinct, powerful messages. So our approach is really that you need 5 really simple, powerful key messages, much more than you need any certain number of pages. And because once you have those, you can build out any number of different vehicles. I will say, just to the kind of the tactical question of when you're meeting with a donor, you want to put something in their hands, what feels substantial enough to them to justify a significant ask. That's part of the question. When we do print pieces, they tend to be 8 pages, 12 pages, 16 pages, 20 pages, somewhere in that range. We'll mix them up with very straightforward copy plus stories, photos. We leave a lot of room for photos, infographics. We'll do 16, 20-page pieces, but we only do those after we've got our very clear messages nailed down, and we make sure that if you're just skimming through the piece, those messages leap out at you.
I would just add a little bit here. First, I do think it's worth clarifying, when we're talking about print pieces of 16 to 20 pages, those are often fully designed brochures,
right, yeah.
Not desktop published. So we're not talking about 3,000 word pieces here. They're often pretty concise per page. We tend to limit it to just a couple hundred words a copy on those. I think if you're writing a traditional case statement as like a Word document, I would try to create one piece that gives you a total overview of the campaign but it's pretty easy to read in like 10 minutes. So try not to go above, say, 6 to 8 pages with your core piece, and then keep in mind that you can write supplementary pieces for each project. That's oftentimes where a lot of the additional length will come from. So I would try and separate out project details from the core case that introduces the projects but might not tell you everything about them.
Great. Well, here's another one about getting buy-in, and the question is, how do you get buy-in from staff or volunteers who think that perhaps you should be going in a different direction?
Well, that's certainly one of the more challenging circumstances that we find ourselves in. There's some level of that is inevitable, just in any committee-driven process, and I think it gets to what can be so challenging about casework in a campaign setting is you approach it as a writing exercise, like I got to write this campaign case, but everyone else is approaching it as a strategic planning exercise, and there are these just much broader questions that are getting hashed out through the vehicle of a piece, a written piece. So that's, again, one of the reasons we like to use simpler approaches to defining the case and documenting the case, so that every time the discussion advances and the ideas evolve, you're not having to go back and rewrite 5 pages of text. You're really hammering it out through an outline, or hammering it out through like a presentation format. This is also another reason why most campaigns, or a lot of campaigns, begin from a strategic planning exercise, and hopefully you've built legitimacy through that exercise. But there can also just be an awful lot of, this is why this part of the process can take a long time. It can be you can have a whole year of just campaign prep and campaign readiness and campaign kind of rollout. And we've seen campaigns where there's really individual diplomacy that needs to happen, where we'll go around, and we'll have to go around to 2 or 3 key members of a board almost one by one and build their support and roll them into the project individually, so that they feel good about it, because we just know that if they're not happy with it, it's not really they're gonna create problems within the committee, or it's just not gonna get any momentum.
I would just say, add to that, just to the greatest extent possible, just try to make sure everyone feels heard as you're developing the case and refining it, and that everyone can see some piece of themselves and their concerns reflected in it, if possible, even if their perspective is not the one driving the overall narrative.
Yeah, you can often, by picking up a key phrase or an idea from someone, make them feel really good about the process without losing or diluting the document or getting too far into writing by committee territory. So yeah, but it's a tricky question, and it's as much a leadership and a strategic planning question as a case development question.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one. What recommendations do you have for integrating operating or annual fund into a case? In other words, building a case for a comprehensive campaign.
Yeah. So I think oftentimes when you're talking about the annual fund, first, that doesn't mean that you won't have the big picture vision there, because really you're moving the case for the entire school forward, or the entire organization forward, in both a above and beyond way, while still continuing to maintain your ongoing operations. And I think oftentimes we still approach the overall big picture visioning part of it, that component of the campaign case, the same, and we'll simply fold annual operating support in there at more of the strategy or project level. So we might say, this is where we are going forward, but it's important that we maintain our ongoing strength every year, because this is what lets, say, our students have these experiences in the classroom, or this is what supports the plays we're putting up on our stage right now as we prepare to move into our home. So we position it as a bridge that is going to lead us to where we're going, but that we also have to keep strong, because it's a component of who we are and what lets us move into that vision.
We've had some case projects where we've been very explicit in saying, when we get to kind of the donor call to action, we will say, we want you to think about three things. The first and most important gift that we all make every year is our annual gift. We all want to start with that. Do that, basically do that first. Second, we would like you to consider a special gift to the campaign over and above your annual contribution, or you can roll those two together and just reflect that it's a larger gift that includes your annual gift. And then, third, if it's part of your strategy and if it's appropriate for the donor, consider the planned giving options or ways to make a legacy gift. So we can, sometimes it's worth just being fairly explicit about that.
Sure. Well, I think we're out of time, but certainly we'll make sure to get back to all the questions that have come in as well. On behalf of Campbell & Company, we'd like to thank you again for joining us today. If we didn't get to your specific question, or you think of more later on, certainly, as always, just please feel free to shoot us an email. And we hope you'll also take a moment to fill out a short survey about your experience today so that we can improve our webinars in the future. This survey should pop up on your screen as soon as we finish the webinar today. And we hope you'll join us, as always, for other future webinars in the series. Another one coming up on July 27th. How do you compare benchmarking for human services? That's our next one. So we hope to see you soon, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.